Podcasters Roundtable, round 97, the rising costs of podcast. Plural there because there could be more than one. So what's the deal? What are we actually talking about? Well, in the description, I talked about how, so I actually asked, is podcasting expensive? And in the beginning, no, it certainly doesn't have to be. And what you might not realize, and I don't think gets talked a lot about, Rob, you guys talked about a new media show. We'll get to that, but is the fact that if you achieve what I assume would be your goal to be really successful, or at least draw a lot of people to your podcast. Now, I think this has to be a whole lot of people. What you don't realize, once you get there, it could cost so much money that either you can't afford it or you didn't monetize and no one else is helping you support it. So again, you can't afford it. And then you have a big problem. So we have perfect people on this round because Rob is he's at Spreaker and he does new media show, and they know the behind the scenes of heavy bandwidth lifts for popular podcasts. And then we have Glenn. We actually have like a case study, like real time. He's going through it. He's going through the transition. So say Glenn. So Glenn is going to let us know what he's doing. But let's meet the roundtable. Daniel, co-host, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm from the audacitytopodcast.com, Daniel J. Lewis, and I've had to invest in podcasting too. I remember that same decision where I was in Glenn's place many years ago thinking, how am I going to pay for this? So I'm looking forward to this.
Exactly. Dave Jackson, co-host, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. And silly me, I like to actually talk about things I know about, which means if I'm going to talk about a blue Yeti that now sits in my closet and gathers dust, I have to buy one. So that's another fun-filled thing that you can run into.
You lost me. What was the connection there?
Well, if I'm going to talk about a microphone, like
are you saying you don't know anything about this topic and you're trying to excuse yourself?
No, I'm trying to figure out ways that I spend money that I didn't think about. And that would be one, that I keep buying microphones so I can talk about them firsthand.
Yeah, you need to autograph them and either give them away and get more subscribers or sell them. I have a big problem selling gear, so I understand completely. But Hey, welcome back to the roundtable, Glenn.
Hey, how are you, Glenn? The geek from the Horse Radio Network, horseradionetwork.com.
Very cool.
And I think we're going to get into more of what I'm going through right now.
For sure. And Rob, welcome back.
It's great to be here, Ray. It's been a few months, so it's awesome to jump on here. My name is Rob Greenlee, and I work at Spreaker, and we're a hosting platform, and I do two podcasts. I do one called the Spreaker Live Show at SpreakerLiveShow.com, and I also do one called the New Media Show at NewMediaShow.com. So they're both live shows. They're not hugely popular shows, so I don't have this huge bandwidth problem. But the New Media Show is a live and on-demand video program, which consumes a lot of bandwidth on the podcasting side. But fortunately, Todd Cochrane from Blueberry has that one handled for us. But yeah, I've had a lot of exposure to handling shows that are really big, like the Adam Carolla Show, and managing that bandwidth that needs to be given to a show like that. And it can be a challenge. It's not an easy thing to juggle. Popularity can come with a price.
Yeah, and I think that your co-host is going to join us. I sent him the link. He might be available. So Todd might jump in. We'll have a lot of experience on this panel, but let's just sort of hash out the premise a little bit more. This applies to not only podcast hosting, which I think we're going to focus on because we're talking about how much does it cost to deliver a podcast and how do you do that, and services and budgets and all that stuff. But it applies to websites too, so hopefully we'll get into that a little bit. And I've run up against that one. So while this show certainly isn't going to break any bandwidth records, and I don't have to worry about that. I mean, we're going to a very niche audience where I know the cap is, I would never doubt it would break 8,000, let alone 10,000. So something like I'm using, hosting at Libsyn, Dave works at Libsyn, it's fine. My plan's going to handle that. But Daniel, you sort of alluded to the fact that you've made those decisions. So where are you? Or are you talking about a website, which we'll get to later?
Actually, both. For me, it was media hosting and website. Back in the early days of podcasting, maybe before I'd started the Audacity to Podcast or shortly after, I had been self-hosting my media on my own shared web hosting account through probably SiteGround or one of those, shared hosting companies, Host5, I think.
Which is not unusual. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not unusual. People do it whether they know it's good or not. It happens.
And if you have and always will have a small audience, and I say this with great caution, but you may be able to fly under the radar and neither get caught or cause problems.
So what I'm curious about that is that while that's true, what about technical issues that, we talk, you have to have, has to allow head request and all this technical stuff, right? I mean, so is there anything you guys special? Here we go. We start with the topic and we branch off. Is there anything special about podcast hosting, maybe Dave, that's going to protect us or do for us for podcast specific needs that a website host that is for websites isn't going to do?
Well, I just know when I talk to Bluehost and HostGator and a few other hosting, it's not the bandwidth that's the issue. They're just not set up to have 4,000 people.
CPU cycles.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Their server's going to.
But technically, if you could get away with it, quote unquote, right, under the radar, which if you have a small show, you probably won't ever pop up. And I know big shows that have. But Daniel, are there any technical things that like going to Ellipsen or Blueberry would do for us, or is it just if you can get away with it, you get away with it?
Well, yeah, there are some technical things. First is byte range request is absolutely required.
That's what I was looking for.
That's what makes it possible for you to, without downloading a show, to simply press play on an episode and it start playing, and that you be able to jump around in that episode to listen to different parts without having to pre-download the entire thing. That's a byte range request, and that's now supported almost everywhere except for maybe those rare places where you're really hacking things together, like the not necessarily this case, but like the Dropboxes of the world or the Box.nets or the Google Drives of the world, those places that are not designed for this kind of hosting at all, or really any kind of public hosting. But the other technical thing is to consider the bandwidth, because it's not merely a matter of how much bandwidth you can support. This is the illustration I like to use. Look at the room you're in, whatever room you're in. That room can hold an unlimited number of people, just not all at once. That's the way it is with the server. So they say unlimited bandwidth, just not all at once. So if with a podcast, the big danger there is you release an episode, and by default now, many of these podcast apps are set to check for new episodes every few minutes, some of them, or maybe it's every hour or something, but you're most likely going to have a large majority of your audience downloading your file at the same time. And that's when you get into concurrent connections, and that can bring down a server, like just as small as 50 concurrent connections downloading the same 50 megabyte or 100 megabyte file can bring down a server or cause a CPU spike or certain other technical problems like that, that a CDN or a hosting company designed for this kind of stuff has certain things in place, including CDN, content distribution network, and other things in the technical backend that prevents that kind of wave of new downloads from causing any crashing that you might run into if you're hosting your own media.
When we get to the website section, I want to relate this also to RSS feeds. It's actually what I ran into an issue, but there might be the difference between like a shared hosting, and maybe that's the level up to like, VPN or, something that is more dedicated to you. But Todd joins us not from his studio. I don't think we've had Todd. Todd, you've been here a few times. We've never caught you in the studio, man. You just don't like it to be there unless it's a new media show or your own show.
Yeah, I'm with a client today, so I actually snuck out and went to the car and told him I need to step out for about 30 minutes.
Hey, but what? Okay, so what? That headset sounds fantastic. What are you using?
A $12 Chinese special,
dude. Kudos to China on that one, or well, I'll just stop there. But it's kudos. That mic actually, we'll need a link for that. People are going to say, "What is it using?" Because it sounds great. So you could buy like 5 of those, and as they break, you could just replace it. I like it. All right, so
that's what I do.
Yeah. All right. So, Daniel, we talked. Well, what was your specific situation when it came to media hosting that made you have to say, oh man, this is going to start costing me more money than I actually planned on it or knew about in the future? Maybe did you know when you started a podcast? you knew you need to host your media, but did you? And you're like, I got to put this somewhere.
No, I didn't know, because I started my first podcast before I totally understood what podcasting was and all of the considerations of stuff. And like many podcasters, when I started, I looked out and I saw Libsyn, Blueberry costs extra money on top of my website. Why would I need that? I have unlimited bandwidth with my Site 5 hosting account and all of this stuff. And so for me, a few things hit at the same time. Among those were launching a podcast network. So now I was hosting multiple shows using the same bandwidth with completely different audiences. And on the website side, also, I started getting into WordPress multi-site, which is a major resource hog. And so with all of this stuff hitting at the same time, the web hosting company said, hey, you're using too much of our bandwidth. Figure out what it is and fix it and stop.
So at that point, you went to Blueberry Libsyn. Is that what the decision was, to just get paid hosting?
I moved the media, or started moving the media, over to Libsyn for one of the shows. Not all of them, but the more popular one. Certainly the Audacity to Podcast, I host over there. And then I also use Blueberry for stats.
So here's a question, and we'll get there. And I got so much to talk about. Daniel, what was the threshold? Do you know what the threshold was that you started to be like, that you started getting warnings, or you know what I mean? Like, can you tell is it website visitors or was it downloads on your show?
For me, there seemed to be no correlation for it. It was probably some invisible threshold that, based on the particular node they put me on and who my neighbors were on that same server node, that maybe the combination of all of these factors and some kind of unique fractal of a situation here, that I ended up being the victim of my own problem.
The victim. Okay. All right. So
when I tried to pinpoint Bluehost and HostGator and I think HostMonster, nobody would ever give me an answer to that question. What's the threshold? When do I know if I'm getting too close? They would never answer it.
Right. And hey, so this is good segue into Glenn and what's going on with you. Now we know, well, for those who don't know, you have a popular network of shows, and networks is another conversation because everyone wants to start a network, right? And they don't realize, hey, I want to put 24 shows, which Todd and Rob probably talk about, onto my cheap hosting account, and I want to, that should be fine, right? No problem. But Glenn, so your network is quite popular. So where's it at now? Why are you?
I knew nothing when I started 10 years ago. So I wasn't even smart enough to look around for a Blueberry or Libsyn. I was a website designer, and I said, well, I've used HostMonster before. I had a pretty good relationship with them. I had my own private customer service person. So I just started it and hosted it there. The only thing I knew, and you guys are going to cringe, I had this discussion with Todd. And Todd, I still haven't done anything about it yet. But FeedBurner was what I used just for the RSS feed, and just hosted it at HostMonster, which has been fine for 10 years. I was on a semi-dedicated server. So it was me and one other company. Last year, I started getting a flood of emails from listeners saying, we can't get on, it's really slow. I'm hitting play and nothing happens. So I call HostMonster, and he said, well, you should have been off of this server about 3 years ago. So that's what happened. I'm on a dedicated server with them now.
So you can't even be on a dedicated server. So I'm
on a dedicated server with them now. I pay $250 a month for a dedicated server with them.
But you're telling me it sounds like you're going to need to go to some real hosting that can handle probably the amount of traffic your podcast is moving, right? Can you give us some idea of that threshold? You don't have to.
When I talk to them, Dave's right about that. When I talk to them, I said, is it I tried to blame the other company that was on our server, and he said, no. He said, this is you. He said, no, this is you.
So with your network, though, you've got how many shows doing, I would imagine?
Well, we put out about 80 episodes a month.
80 episodes a month?
Yeah, we have 6,300 sound files on there, stored on there now.
How many downloads is it? Do you know?
It's a terabyte of data every month. Okay, I think when I looked 2 months ago, we were at about 6 terabytes. A month, yep.
Todd is sweating over there.
No, Todd and I are going to talk about it. We're going to be making this all happen. So yeah, so I got lucky. I had a good relationship with Host Monster. I have never had a problem with them.
But it's going to start costing you a backside ton.
Yes.
Yeah, a buttload of money. So, I mean, you've monetized your network. So I'm assuming that's going to take a big chunk out of your profit, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah, it will, definitely, which is why I've been putting it off and haven't talked to Todd yet.
Yeah.
Just because, it's been working. I know it's not going to work forever, and I got to do something about it. So I'm at that point where I have to do something.
So Todd, when a guy like Glenn comes to you, he's got a big network, he's running it over on his own, and he wants to move it over. What is he staring down the barrel of in terms of cost?
Well, we've been pretty public on our pricing. If you're moving more than 5 terabytes, I can actually start working with you on pricing. But if someone's just coming to me with a brand new network, they're looking at 10 cents a gig. But as you go up in volume, I'm able to lower pricing, of course. So, he can probably get down in the nickel range per gig at his level. But, actually Glenn's in a pretty good situation right now. His traffic isn't too bad. I moved a guy off a network. His network bill with incredible discounts is $8,000 a month. He just moved off SoundCloud. Yeah, he is moving. Let's put it this way: hundreds and hundreds of terabytes of data a month. So it's
okay, Todd. So what are the thresholds you see? So someone who start with Blueberry is maybe the same version you guys have. I don't know what it's called, but we start with a $20 account. At what point does my show become popular enough where I get a call from Todd and says, let's talk, we have to talk? Because you guys have you have a philosophy for indie podcasters, which we'll talk about, but if you give us some idea about that threshold.
Well, be honest with you, I've got some podcasters that are moving 60, 70, 80 terabytes a month, and they're on a flat rate plan.
So you eat it because they're
independent.
Which means, how do you, what is it, just because if you don't have a corporation behind you?
If you're a radio station, if you are a business, if you have a network, you are a commercial entity. If you're a guy in the garage doing a show, or a couple of guys in a garage doing a show, even if you're doing some advertising, you're still, in my view, an independent content creator.
Okay, where does Daniel fall? Because he does a network, but he's indie.
He would be definitely, though, he would have to apply for a pro hosting account, having a network. He couldn't host them under one account.
Even just with the Audacity to Podcast alone, I've come to accept that is a commercial endeavor. So when I buy software licenses or image licenses or anything like that, I make sure everything I get can be licensed for commercial use. So even I may be the one and only guy, Georg said I am probably one of the very few, if not the only one, who actually paid for the Aphonic commercial license, the $300 version, because I realized that my income comes from my podcast, and my income then is over their reasonable limit. So for me, the podcast is my business, and I recognize that as my business, it means I need to pay for business level services.
And you're very unique, because we know podcasters, come on, you guys, you're cheap. So you don't want to pay. And
you are the only guy that paid for that.
A lot of times it's a hobby, or it starts that way. And I mean, there are hacks. I mean, we could talk about, this could take us right into the path. Hit it out of the park for me, new media show with the SoundCloud. We had an announcement today that they just slashed employees. They're shutting down New York and San Francisco office. Basically, they're sinking ship. But we've been saying that for a long time. Until it happens, it doesn't happen. But if you're a podcaster who hosts on SoundCloud, that is one way you can pay one price and get pretty much unlimited. And Todd, you sort of alluded to the fact, or you did say that you had a guy move over from SoundCloud because he was pushing so much. He was getting away with it. This is one of the reasons SoundCloud is going out of business. There's a whole bunch, I'm sure. But I don't know if you guys want to talk to that a little bit about the way people are getting around this, because it can be tough. If you start a podcast, you don't realize that this thing could end up costing a ton of money if you reach a lot of people.
We had a podcaster recently. The only reason we really kind of figured it out was that they called and said, how do we set up 24 feeds and PowerPress, and we're like, okay, great. We looked at their account, and they had $180 a month account, and I'm like, I'm sorry, you can't run 24 shows underneath one hosting account. That's talk. So their bill essentially went from $80 based on the 100 and about 30 terabytes of traffic they're moving every month, and they're out of Brazil. Their bill went significantly north. But you know what was funny? They said, okay, they knew they were moving that kind of bandwidth. So they knew they were sliding underneath the radar.
This doesn't sound like too much of a concern for what I would call the average podcaster.
No, not at all.
I think though there is that moment though for podcasters where they realize I can no longer keep painting with peanut butter, as Dave puts it. This thing I've hacked together to try and save $2 per month isn't going to work anymore. I'm going to have to start paying, and maybe even start having to pay a lot more than this. And that's that moment where, yes, you can suffer and save a few dollars per month, but by that point, you probably have ways that your podcast is profiting you in some way that it's worth the investment. Or there's so much potential there that you haven't even tapped into yet. Like even just if you went to your audience and you said, we know that the downloads have been a little flaky lately. We want to move over to Blueberry or whatever service, but it's going to cost extra. But the great thing is it will mean the downloads will be fast. They'll be consistent. They won't have problems. You'll be able to get our episodes consistently. We need your support. Would you help us? I think your audience, as long as you provide value to your audience, I think they would step up and be happy to throw in $1 per month or more if it meant, for one thing, keeping your show on, and another thing, meaning that your show would be more reliable in its downloads.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially if your audience has gotten to that level, right? Sounds like a good time for a Patreon at that point, they could just, well, even you're going to pay a PayPal fee somehow. So
Right.
I don't know. I'd give them Patreon, give more back, but
Maybe it's the teacher in me, because I'm used to having like, you have your set criteria. If you did, if you got a 70%, you got a C. If you got an 80%, you got a B. So I'm just wondering, Todd, do you have any plans of coming up with some sort of more like, because I can see somebody going, hey, wait a minute, how come he gets to pay 80? I got to pay 8,000. And I realize that there are some people that are going to go, yeah, I know. We've been flying under the radar, but are you prepared for somebody to come at you and go, that's not fair? Or have they already done that? Probably.
No, I maybe in all the time that again, I just like you guys over there at Lipson, this is the business I'm in. And if I get a few customers that are using high bandwidth, then I eat that. And I would be a hypocrite to go to that high bandwidth show and say, hey guys, you need to move to commercial. Example, H3, they're 6.3 million YouTube followers, and they're hosting with this.
H3, yeah. Oh, wow.
And they started a podcast, and it's going trajectory straight up. So, they're pretty indie some would say, well, maybe they're commercial, but the way I look at them so far, they're looking pretty indie to me. So,
yeah.
But really the bigger problem is for the majority of 99% of the podcasters are never going to get a call from me or from Libsyn or from Podbean or whoever saying, hey. What the call is going to come is, and sadly, it's the guys that are on quit promoting Bluehost, because Bluehost is shutting down more podcasters right now than it's an epidemic. There are very low threshold over there for them. But what ends up happening is they don't complain about the bandwidth. They complain about your resource utilization. You're using too many server resources, or there's too many open connections on their server. They don't often complain about the bandwidth. They always use a different excuse to bounce your media. And we get them daily, 3, 4, 5 a day. My host has shut me down, help. And it runs the gambit. There isn't a hosting provider that we've got a list. I think there's like 82 hosts that are on the list that we've gotten podcasts from that we're hosting their media on that shared hosting account. So it's not a matter of, it's just a matter of when you're going to get that email saying you're using too many resources.
Yeah. And in that case, it's a difference, right? We've gone to websites. I'm coming back through someone's. All right. So when it comes from your web host, I mean, I guess if you're hosting it on your own media, I ran into that with just my media wasn't on there. My RSS feeds were on there, and they were getting hit enough to then make my host say, no, this is it's getting hit too much. Basically, the CPU was getting spiked. So, I mean, this could happen not just with media. I think it can happen to a popular website as well. And that just might mean you need to go to the next level of a website. So you might not crest that, you might not break through that barrier of you need really expensive media hosting, but you might need the next level of website hosting, right?
I ran into that too in those same early days when, when I went into WordPress multi-site, which is much more of a resource hog, and I maybe didn't have the most optimized theme and some other things going on, but I was regularly crashing the server. And so I had to jump around. I tried VPS, I tried dedicated server. Then I moved over to Synthesis by Copyblogger and was paying, I think, $150 a month over there. And then they came down and said, we decided you can't host multi-site with us because it's such a resource hog. So then I bounced around to other different places. Like I tried WP Engine, and WP Engine service is fantastic, but it's extremely expensive. And,
amen, brother. Holy cow.
Like
That's
for
pretty
me,
bad.
and this was during the biggest popularity of the TV show Once Upon a Time. And the Once podcast that we host then was getting, I think, 500,000 views per month on the website, or some ridiculously high number, something like that. And we were running BB Press, a very popular forum for the TV show. And we still run that today. It's just not as popular anymore. So all of this stuff, the database today is still 4 gigabytes just for the database alone for this WordPress multi-site. So it was just loading down every place that I would try, and the number of visits that we would get would mean we have these exorbitant costs, until I finally decided I'm going to learn how to run my own virtual private server, manage it myself, which is in some ways one of the best decisions I made, and also one of the worst decisions I made at the same time. And so, yeah, I save a lot of money running it myself, but it also means there are some times I've broken it and had no idea how to fix it.
Well, that's often the trade-off in podcasting, where you're going to trade something for your cash. But hey, Rob, do you guys have a pro version, or do you see this at Spreaker?
Well, we have pro versions, but it's basically our regular plans. So we're a platform that has some big popular shows, but we don't have a huge amount of really, really big shows. So we haven't really had too much issue with this stuff. We usually just eat it because we have so many little shows. So I think we're coming into a phase of the company when this is going to be an issue, and we're going through the planning process right now to be able to support that as bigger shows host with us. One thing also, talking about SoundCloud, they've been out there giving away free hosting plans to certain podcasters for many years. And that puts pressure on the rest of us, Spreaker included. I mean, every week I get pitched by some fairly large show that wants to get free hosting in exchange for something. And I think it's definitely a challenge. I mean, if we take on too many free,
that business, they're going out of business. So, you know what I mean? It's an easy sell when you say, yeah, they're sinking their own ship, and go ahead and go over there.
Yeah, that's exactly what the issue is with SoundCloud. SoundCloud has put themselves in a position where they're hosting all this stuff for free. They're not making much revenue off of it.
And it's music is the main thing. It's not pod.
Yeah, exactly. And they're getting hammered by music licensing fees. That's just draining them. And my recommendation is certainly don't host on any platform that's involved in the streaming music industry. I think that's a mistake. I mean, those models are usually unprofitable. So it's not going to work. I think moving over to a dedicated hosting for podcast platform is a much smarter move for a bunch of reasons. It actually enables you to better handle your RSS feed, because oftentimes depending on the size of the media file, the RSS feed can actually be just as heavy as the download of the media file. So if you're doing that all on your own self-hosted server, it can take down your server, just the RSS feed.
Yeah, I think that's where you'll see it first.
You guys are gonna get on my bad side here.
That's what this show is for.
Yeah. Just so everybody remembers, 65,000 podcasters are serving their own RSS feed today. So don't tell me that you can't serve your own feed.
Not that you can't, but I think this will be the first call you get when it comes to upgrading your podcast from the cheap $5 a month. This will be the first call you get.
Well, there are certainly things that affect that. Like even just like a year or 2 years ago, Lead Pages, which is this service for making your own landing pages and pop-ups on your website and stuff like that. There are ethical ways to do pop-ups. But Lead Pages had a WordPress plugin that if you enabled a certain option in that plugin, it would completely crash your RSS feed. And working with Angelo Mandato over at Blueberry, he figured out a way to basically kick Lead Pages out of the feed so it wouldn't crash. But certain things like that can happen that it's a bad decision. That's the thing. I wish that we could say WordPress was idiot proof, but there are some really intelligent idiots out there who make really dumb decisions.
And I'll help you out, Todd, because here's what a lot of times the problem is. Your website host is not versed in podcasting. They have a hard time telling you what it is, how to deal with it. One thing, you just have a problem that no one can help you with, or you're going to have a very hard time finding someone to help you with. But this is one of the cases. I would say you guys have now PowerPress sites. So I love this, because what I always want to tell people who are not they're not us. They're not down in the weeds. They don't want to turn the wrench on their podcast. They just want it to work, right? Squarespace is a nice option for a nice website, but they don't quite get podcasting. There's a lot of broken elements there. So you guys now have PowerPress sites, which you're going to take that. You're going to manage the WordPress in an appropriate way so they can serve it. So I think that's, there's a nice plug.
and it runs like a rocket ship. And we got
because you guys know what you're doing for it. That's the key.
And we got something else coming too. So
you can make announcements on this show. No one listens to this show.
Just that.
Well, just be very careful when you have a web person working on your website, because I've had this happen twice where they let in and literally they deleted PowerPress. And I'm like, what are you doing? That's the RSS feed. And they're like, so you put it back and everything came right back. But they're like, oh, I didn't know what that was for. And we're redesigning it. I'm like, oh, geez. So be careful when you because that guy knows a whole much more about CSS than I do, but he knew nothing about podcasting and just shot it right in the foot.
That's often the divide. I mean, even I'm someone who knows a lot about podcasting. I don't know a lot about websites, enough to be dangerous and get in there and do what I want. But, there's a clear divide there between knowledge, and not a lot of people have the knowledge in both of those to handle what you need. But Glenn, so you're self-hosting, but you're looking to move, and it's going to cost you a lot of money.
Todd made a good point. Yeah, I'm an example of somebody who can self-host, and it's been working, And the other thing too here is it's not necessarily money. I don't think money has been the thing that stopped me in the beginning. I just didn't know any better in the beginning what I was doing. And then I got so busy trying to sell ads and keep my company running, and it worked. I just kept doing what I'd done before, and it worked. I had no reason to look anywhere else because what I was doing worked. I spent more time trying to sell ads and get sponsors and make a living doing this. So, it's not always the money. Sometimes it's just the time. And it wasn't broke. So I didn't have, it just wasn't broke. FeedBurner still worked, and I understand that that's probably going to break someday. I've never had a problem with it. I never had a problem with my server till last year with my serving company, and I never had a problem with FeedBurner. So
that you know of. It doesn't mean your feed wasn't down and didn't know it.
That's right. Except my listeners usually let me know that. So I don't know if Todd's heard that before, but it was just something I I was just doing it and doing my business, and I just didn't give it any thought, to be honest.
Well, sure. I'm sure a lot of the people that Todd and Rob see are people whose stuff has broken and now
Right.
they're panicking, right? I mean, people
Right.
move for a reason, right, Todd? Right, Rob?
Well, they panic when their hosting provider says you've got 24 hours to move your media. I've never had a podcaster contact us because their site's getting shut down because of their feed. I've had the podcasters get shut down because of their media. So we've had podcasters, of course, that have had problems with their feeds. Everyone does. Some people like to say, we never have problems with our feeds. Well, okay. We see the Twitter posts too. So,
Well,
so
Todd,
anyway.
it's the combination of hosting your media files and your RSS feed on the same server.
And perhaps also
Oh.
making some other bad decisions.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. But I did want to say one thing, and I know we're on this hosting meme, and I'm very serious. I know that we're all competitors here. We've got 3-4 different podcast offerings in the house today, and I don't like to really wave a red flag when one is not needed, but I am really worried about specifically the SoundCloud users that have their sole point of presence on SoundCloud. If their show and their feed is on SoundCloud, there could be a mass level extinction event for podcasters coming. So if you are in that situation where you just have your show and your feed only at SoundCloud, you need to make some preparations now to be prepared. And that doesn't matter. You can come to any one of us and we'll take care of you. And you don't have to leave SoundCloud, but at least put some preparation into in case something does happen down the road. At least put an insurance policy in place that you can flip the switch if you need to.
Use the tools to build the platform. Don't build your platform on the tools. I repeated this joke, or this thing I keep running joke in my last episode of the Audacity to Podcast. I think a year or so ago, when Blab was still a thing, God rest its soul, there was a guy who came on to Dave Jackson's show and was like bragging about how big he was on Blab. Where is Blab today?
Yeah.
Clamor, even. What if someone was saying, "Oh, I'm big on Clamor"? Well, Clamor is gone.
Yeah, but that
Blab is
guy,
gone.
I've heard from that guy, and he's actually huge on Anchor right now. soon to be somewhere else. I mean, so that's fun. That takes us into another space here. Hacks. The way people are getting around this. Some people are, Anchor's got now a podcast offering. I would not suggest going that way. It's not, they do not know what they're doing really with that.
They
Anchor's
don't.
a good service, but this is a bad play so far. So don't do that. People are using SoundCloud. We've discussed the dangers of that and having insurance plan. Hey, look, an insurance plan is probably saying you should have it for no matter where you host your media. Always have an out when your podcast breaks if you can, or at least have a plan. Know who you're going to go to, right? The services you have here today have amazing customer support. So know who you can go to when something breaks. And, some people, they're doing heavy lifts on archive.org, which to me, in my opinion, is abuse of the system. That's not what it's built for, but I know big shows existing on archive.org. I don't know if you guys, if you know any other ways people are, some people are going to try to get around this. They don't have the money. They didn't monetize their show. Where's the money going to come from? Yes, they could ask their audience, but that's not immediate.
One of the ways I'm even seeing this with a service I run, mypodcastreviews.com. It's the service that gathers your global podcast reviews from all 155 iTunes stores, plus Stitcher, plus more coming. And there is a free plan, but I very specifically say on where you see the list of the different plans for the free plan, I call it now personal. And underneath it says personal use only. And underneath that, there's a check spot where it says commercial podcasts allowed, and it has a X in it. No, not commercial podcast allowed on that. In the FAQ, I have a section that defines what a commercial podcast is in the terms of service.
Most people aren't going to dig that deep. So you're going to have to approach them and say, look, you are in a commercial podcast. They're not going to do it voluntarily.
On the sign up page where there's the checkbox, they need to click to say, yes, I agree to the terms of service. Specifically, when they're signing up for the personal plan, I have it display in there. So it's conditional. If they're signing up for that plan, it says, and I agree not to use this personal plan for a commercial podcast. And that links back to the other things that define
No
what
one
that
reads
is.
that.
It's still something you have to enforce. That's going to be.
So,
I got to go in and cancel my account quick.
Yeah.
So I see this happen. It's happened just today again. someone signed up for the personal use only plan with what I define as a commercial podcast. Now, some people may not agree with my definition of a commercial podcast. I've tried to find an actual hard line for defining this, so I'm not in
Your
that
business
position to
doesn't matter.
say
you are in that position. It's your business.
Yeah,
You make the rules.
So for me, like and maybe commercial isn't the best word, but so I'm open up to different words, but I say if it's a podcast about business in a business category, run as a business, a lead generator for a business, or it's sponsored by a business, it's a commercial podcast. So I get these people who will sign up for the free plan. So I send them this series of emails to let them know. And some of them will come back to say, oh, it's still a personal podcast. I'm not making money with it. But you're talking about business. You may not be making money yet, but you're positioning yourself as a business, or you're positioning this as a business subject.
So bottom line is you're just mean. And
Yes,
we figured that out.
Well, I am evil.
Glenn, what?
No, I didn't have anything. I was just,
it was Dave. It was Dave. You guys, you sit next to each other. You look the same.
Well, my whole point, what are we talking about? What's the next plan up, Daniel? Isn't it like $5 or $10 or $15 or something?
$5 a month.
Yeah, so that's the thing that drives me crazy. Is
we already know this though, Dave. We're all cheap up here. This is just not happening. So that's why you have to enforce it. They're not going to self-regulate.
Govern. Yeah, that's true.
So so for new podcasters who are coming into this, you've seen on this panel, a lot of people started and said, I knew nothing. I didn't know where to go. I didn't even think to go there. So as a new podcaster who's starting, listening to this show, or maybe they're either starting or they have started. It could be 50 episodes in. What should you be thinking about as you continue to try to grow your podcast? You want to get people to your website. You want to get people to your show and subscribe. It sounds like most don't have to even think about this, but it's good to have it on your radar, right? It's good to know that when it comes to your website, there are different levels of hosting. Certainly, if your website gets popular enough, you might need to be on
I have a question. I don't know who can answer this of the three hosting companies we have here. Do we have any new? I just assumed all new podcasters were going with one of you.
No way.
There's 25 different providers now that are out there. So there's a new service that pops up every day.
Yeah, and there are two that I know of that are testing the free model again, which will crash and burn in about 12 to 16 months.
But hey, so Rob and Todd, where do you think the majority of podcasters? Now, you guys probably do capture the majority. Do you think, or is that wrong? Do you think you capture the majority?
We saw a report on that today, didn't we?
I would say between the top four, SoundCloud, Libsyn, Blueberry, and Spreaker, and probably Podomatic,
Podbean's in there. That would probably not Podomatic.
Those guys are capturing probably 90% of the new accounts,
and the rest are probably self-hosted or archived or something free, right? Some type of free, but they're somewhere else. That's probably not podcast specific hosting.
Yeah, there's some bad, like I think there was one that was like Sermoncast or something like that. There are a lot of people
don't go with those. Like anytime if you've never heard of it.
Yeah. and that's another case where it's a company that's jumping into the bandwagon, and then you go, well, you just need to redirect your feed, and you find out that they can't. So be careful of those.
I welcome the competition in this space because it keeps everyone that's been in this space for a while, keeps them on their toes, keeps them moving forward. And, we look at every new competitor that comes in and what they're offering, and we keep an eye on. I'm sure they're keeping an eye on us. We keep an eye on Libsyn, we keep an eye on Spreakers. We all do that on each other. So I think it keeps the space moving forward too, keeps us innovating.
Yeah. But this isn't just something you hear talked about. The price of podcasting. This is called the rising costs of podcasting, and it's sort of just a play on words, but as you get more popular, your costs can go up, right? Or this may be a reason, Rob, why at Podcast One, you probably sign these big names because they can't, if they start a podcast, they're going to get a bandwidth bill they can't handle right from the start, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of them, and we haven't talked about this part yet, is that there is a whole nother section of the podcast hosting business that is different than Libsyn and Blueberry and stuff. They're the Art 19s, the Panoplies, those that do hosting at the, we're really focused on advertising, right? So they're looking for really big shows. They're providing that dynamic ad insertion technology, the targeting, all that kind of technology to the mix. And those folks oftentimes have to pay for their bandwidth plus a licensing fee to get access to the technology. Plus the hosting platform will split the ad revenue with them as well. So and that's what my experience at Podcast One was. Some shows they pay for their bandwidth at some discounted rate because the platform is able to aggregate enough terabytes or gigabytes of data that they can get their cost structure down. So it's actually less expensive to go oftentimes with one of these big networks to host on. You pay the bandwidth, but then you also have these other fees that you pay, and sometimes it's worth it for these shows to move in that direction. And I think that's somewhat what's happening in the space today too, is that more and more shows are moving to these platforms that are focused on monetizing and dynamic ad insertion, in the hopes of being able to monetize archives. And a lot of the shows are perfectly happy to pay the 10 cents a gigabyte or whatever, because they're making money on the other side, on the advertising side. And that's what the model was that Podcast One was under as well. Is that, the Adam Carolla show paid Podcast One per gigabyte to host his show. But yet there was an ad sales agreement between the two companies that defrayed those costs. So that's the other side of the space.
And then one thing too that they can bring to bear, these networks, including even us, is that I've got a podcaster right now they've had explosive growth, and they
like
are
something you need medicine for.
Yeah, and they're having challenges monetizing. So their network's growing faster than their costs. They basically can't keep up with costs. So, I really said, listen, we want to make sure this podcaster survives so they can get over this hump. And we put in a year's worth of pro hosting for them at a very low price so that they could at least get to the point where their network can grow and start generating revenue. So that's another thing that you can leverage, is you can come to someone like us or one of these other groups and say, hey, we're growing, we're exploding, we need some help. Can you give us some discounted hosting rates so that you can so that we can get over the hump here? So,
and one thing to consider, even if you're like moving either your media hosting or maybe certain other aspects you could do this with, is there may be, in that transition period, there may be a way for you to not retroactively make all of the changes, but to start doing it from that point forward. And so you're not then immediately transferring all of these terabytes of files over and all of this huge need for so much data. You're transferring it over a little bit more slowly so you can kind of ramp up the cost, or that way then the majority of your audience is getting that faster download from your media host or whatever you've chosen to do. That's not always possible in every situation. But like, for example, if you have 5 microphones and you realize, okay, the microphones we have aren't that good, let's upgrade. Well, you could upgrade all 5 of those microphones at once and have a really big bill, or maybe you can upgrade 1 microphone per month or 1 microphone every couple of months. And yes, it's a slower way and it won't be such a drastic increase in quality, but it's more affordable.
one thing that we forget is, and I relate to this a lot, is when I started my podcast, there was, let's be frank, there was no unlimited hosting out there. And I literally had like 10 shared hosting accounts. I'd post every episode on a different shared hosting account, and I would burn through the 1 terabyte or whatever traffic I had in 2 or 3 days. I'd move the media file. This was the game we played in the early days. So, when Libsyn and other companies came around and started offering the model that they had, it was like, oh my God, is this even possible? So
wait, scandalous. Did you host on Libsyn?
I was going to ask the same thing. The world wants
in the early days, I was not we weren't hosting in the early days. Of course, I hosted on Libsyn in the early days.
It's great. It's great. Kumbaya. I love it. All right. We just
Yeah, I
dug
started-
deep. We dug deep. We dug to get that one out. I love it.
But and not when. Well, anyway, you guys.
Yeah,
But no, I
started
mean that's a
doing
good
it-
point there.
Yeah, I started
It is a
doing
good
it back before Lipson was even up and running. So, yeah, I had my own co-located servers that I built from scratch, and then I had to admin them. I had them in two different co-location facilities.
I remember
And I
the
was-
early days.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was actually hosting other people's live streaming and on-demand programs. I had a total of 5 servers that I had. I wound up taking them down and just doing it other places like at Lipson and things like that, back when I went to work for Microsoft. But yeah, I had to build out my own kind of data center kind of function, and was a little bit of a early Lipson is what I was.
We're starting to see, I think this group has uncovered several surprisingly big podcasts and companies hosting on places that we probably have thinking is a really bad idea. Like even maybe using FeedBurner or something. I don't know how much I want to dig into that, but there are some big shows. So if that SoundCloud goes away, it's going to get very interesting. You're going to know about it because some very big shows are going to have some very big problems very fast.
And there are other things too to consider, like Facebook with Facebook groups. What if someday Facebook decides, okay, you can't charge in any way for people to join your group? And when that happens, paradise will fall. And there will be other major concerns. A lot of people will suddenly be in panic because that means their membership site that's basically just paid access to a Facebook group can't exist, or it would be in violation of terms. So this philosophy of investing plays through, I think, every aspect of podcasting. And here's the thing, and it is investing, and that's the way you need to look at it. For every expense that I have been timid about and thought, oh, this means I'm going to pay this new bill every single month or whatever it is, for every one of those expenses, or I would say almost every one of them, after I started paying for it, I found some way to save money somewhere else or to cover that expense, generate new income, or I found that my life afterward was so much better and it was worth then that investment.
We've been talking all about hosting here, but that's not, even if I make the switch tomorrow and pay the higher hosting costs, which I'm going to have to do, that's not my basic expense every month. When you're running it as a business and we have 32 hosts and we pay most of them something, we have our people that do the editing. Our people are our biggest expense. And Todd, you guys all the same thing. I mean, your biggest expense is always people. And so, that's only a small portion when you get bigger of your expenses. Everything else, the phonics and everything else costs more. The more you do, the more they cost. So all of those expenses added together still is going to greatly exceed a hosting cost that we have. In our case,
you'll have come of age when you get your CDN bill and you can't pay it on your credit card anymore, and you have to do a bank transfer.
Nice.
And, when that one comes, you go, oh.
What happens again is somebody will start a podcast.
Dave, you're breaking up
unplug
on
and
us.
replug. You got the Cylon thing. This is back.
Yeah.
This is old Twit days, man. The USB Cylon effect.
I still get it with all my Mac hosts after an hour and a half.
Yeah,
Interesting. So maybe it's
USB
Mac.
interface.
Am I back?
You're
Yeah,
back.
You're back.
All right. No, we all know that, and it's all Ray's fault. If you start one podcast or two, you start 2 or 3, or in Glenn's case, what are you up to? 39,000 something. It's insane. And that's when you then get into, okay, now I need an editor. And that's another thing, because you want to edit your own shows. Some of us, like Todd's the master. He just, he lets it rip and no editing and so on. But a lot of people want to edit. So that's another expense. I know a lot of people love to use MailChimp, which is free until you get popular. And then you start sending a bunch of emails. So those are things that you don't think about, that all of a sudden you're like, no, because there's not enough. There's still 24 hours in a day.
Our biggest expense every year is travel. That's our biggest expense every year, because we go to shows, we go to events. Travel's our biggest expense. Now, I always try and offset it with sponsorships, but it's still our biggest expense every year.
But what brings you the most sponsors?
Travel.
Yeah,
That's why he does it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point, though. I mean, I'm on MailChimp, and at some point, literally they're just an email is going to show up and say, yeah, you need the next level. Nah, you can't send any more emails. Like, and there's no real plan for that other than be like, am I going to pay it or not? Right. I mean, it's really what it's going to come down to. And you got to make a decision. Now, the people who are the most passionate are probably the people who want to have 30 shows on a network. Right. But it's their hobby. They're there every week. It is the guys or gals in the garage in the spare bedroom, and they just want to do more. They discovered this meme. They want to do more, and they have to do it with less, maybe necessarily because they don't have the budget. They're just doing it. What about some people in those cases where the passion is high, they're not interested in a business, or making money from their podcast is evil, right? There's a point where you do need to think about monetizing in some way for different reasons, maybe even changing your philosophy of, what are we doing here? We do want it to keep going. We want to grow it. So we have to start making money. And I know this is often the pitch for saying, hey, if you're going to discuss a book on your podcast, put the affiliate link, and maybe you can at least cover the cost of your hosting. It's something I say all the time. And then this is when it comes home to roost, when you realize these costs are getting a little bit more than I expected when I started this thing.
When did it become evil to make money, by the way? I
Were you
missed
here in
that
the early
memo.
days? You didn't go to the meetups. You didn't go to the early meetup.
When I walked into the second, what was now podcast movement, more or less, it was what it turned into, Blog World. But that out in Ontario, California, me and Paul Culligan said, hey, we think we can monetize this thing. And they just about tarred and feathered us. They were like, what? It's art, man. What are you talking about, man? You can't. I was like,
pirate radio. There's a divide. I mean, I don't think that exists the way it used to. I'm using it to prove a point. But, when if you're doing this pure passion, there may be different reasons to think, you might incur costs that you did not expect in the beginning, and it might be at least at a minimum nice to cover those costs.
Jeff Goins just came out with a book, and I was a joint venture partner for the launch of this book, and I was a very bad joint venture partner because this is the first any of my following are hearing about this book from me. But he released a book that I think is great along this thought, and it's called Real Artists Don't Starve. And that's the truth we need to realize, is that if you're changing the world, if you're making someone's life better, if you are having fun, there's going to be some point where you're going to have to pay for this. Somehow, I don't know where it came from, but there's this pervading perspective that once we get on the internet, everything should be free. Because you look at most other hobbies, and people
Rob would say YouTube is the problem.
Yeah, so I say blame YouTube for that. Yeah.
But most other hobbies, people aren't thinking, I want to get into coin collecting, but how can I collect coins for free? Yeah, how can I steal some great coins for free? It doesn't really happen. I know there are, of course, exclusions and such, and there are ways to participate in a hobby for free. But to really get the most out of even a hobby, out of the enjoyment of something, you have to spend. And
we're in the most expensive hobby there is, horses.
Oh, man.
They're just hay burners. That's all they are.
Yeah, yep. Most expensive
Boats.
hobby there is. Even more expensive than golf.
although I have heard that it costs less to care for a horse than it does for a dog. Is that true?
No.
No way.
You've been lied to. You've been lied to.
I would think just the food alone would be
Food and just everything. If you're boarding a horse in most places now, you're paying $250 to $400 or $500 a month for one horse.
Just to board it.
Yeah, just to board it.
Daniel's going to scan the chat in case we have something we want to bring in from there. But
well, one of the questions, that someone did bring up, Jason said, do you believe we need to up our game on the audio quality? I occasionally see articles about that saying listeners are becoming accustomed to the higher audio quality from podcasts like NPR and such.
I see Dave having a conniption over there.
Oh, I have a co-host that wants to make an appearance. I'm trying to make him chill out.
Oh, the cat. I forget why. Yes, always. Like, always try to be improving, right? I mean, and yes, at some point, if it's garbage and they can't hear you, if they can hear you, it's fine. It's subjective, but you should be trying your best. At a minimum, right? I don't know what you guys think, but.
Yeah, there's this point where, yes, you may not be the pristine audio quality of these major networks and producers, and they're spending thousands of dollars. And
I would say you can be. I would say that Daniel, the audio that comes out of your studio from a monologue solo, it's not going to sound any different. I mean, does NPR have a slightly better microphone? Yes, but is their room more dead? Not necessarily. I mean, like if it's quiet in your room, it's quiet in your room, and if you got all that acoustic paneling that you built yourself. So I don't think it's hard to compete with that sound. What you're not doing is going out on the street, gathering clips and mixing a bunch of stuff together. That's a different thing, but it doesn't go to your quality.
Right. There's this level where for each little bit of performance, and this applies in so many areas and places, but for 1 point increase in performance, the higher you go, the more exponentially the investment required to reach that additional point. So like, the ATR 2100 USB microphone, or its cousins that are related to it, as popular as that is, it's a good enough quality microphone. Is it the best? No, but it's so much better than your internal microphone. Will people hear a noticeable difference if you go from that microphone to something like the RE320 or some other much more professional microphone? Yes, they may hear that difference, especially if you do it within the same episode, but they may not notice the difference. The most important thing is your technique. It's how you use the tool more so than the tool itself.
I think we have even heard it here that a lot of people, when they start, have to make the decision. They start and they figure out a way to get it done. Then they grow. It doesn't mean they got super popular, but things may have broken or it's just not as easy. And they're like, you know what? I should look into paid hosting. And I find a lot of podcasts, when you start, you don't know. You don't know what you need, right? So I've had to have this conversation a lot of times and explain why paid hosting is better. People think you're just trying to sell them. So they're like, Ray, you got an affiliate link and you're just trying to sell you something. And it's like, well, actually it's experience. And I started off on blip.tv and it was free and I hacked it to use free audio and that became a problem, right? So I eventually went to hosting. But what's that conversation? I mean, if we can help the new podcaster or even the podcaster who's been doing it for a while, what beyond bandwidth? I mean, you got someone who's handling it. What are, Todd and Rob, when you're getting people on the platform and they're trying to make that decision, do I want to? It doesn't matter if $20 is a lot to them. It could be a lot. At some point, it's a lot to all of us, I think, who's independent and starting out. What are the arguing points, or what are the pluses for getting a podcast hosting? That's
I don't hear people complain about cost anymore. I hear people wanting to save time and create content, get in and get out. I say that a lot on even myself. I like to get into my content and get out and continue my life. So I think for the majority of podcasters out there, they know that they're going to invest a little bit of time and money to make it happen. So I don't hear an argument about cost.
So
but
where's
what
the
I
time,
do see,
where's the time savings coming? What am I paying for to save time? How am I saving time by getting Blueberry?
well, I don't want to, my famous saying is post, upload, publish. You're in your dashboard, you write your blog post, you upload your media, you publish, you're done, you're out. And each service has its own selling point. But I think the key is every podcaster graduates into a system and learns to be efficient. So, and I often call it graduating. They're graduating from basic hosting. Maybe they're self-hosting. They get a notice from their hosting provider. They have to jump over, and it's a graduated step. So,
yeah, I agree. I like that. I like that.
Yeah,
I got a laptop battery's going to go dead here, so I might have to leave soon.
Well, when you blink out, we'll you're good.
Okay.
That'll be your wave, and you're out.
I hate to see people go the other end of the spectrum, and they'll go spend $2,500 on equipment that they don't need. So I like Todd's idea of graduate. Start off with this microphone and then move to the next. Don't. I would skip the self-hosted part. I'd just go right to a media company. But I've known people have spent money on video cameras and soundproofing and this and that. I'm like, great, what's your show's about? And they go, yeah, it's the part I need help with. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
But Dave, you work for a media company. Okay, so now you do. You didn't before. So, but where's the difference between? I'm sure.
Look, Dave, I'll jump into that one. Being self-hosted, I'd never, when people talk to me, recommend self-hosting. I always say go to the Libsyns of the Blueberries because it's easier. It's just easier than doing it yourself. It is somewhat complicated to do it yourself. So it's just easier. It'll save you time for the $20 a month, which probably they will never have to spend more.
Time is money.
It's just easier.
And I don't think people realize time is money. Like, you know, how
that's my
saving that
biggest
$20
problem right now is time. Time is always your biggest problem when you're growing a company. It's not always money, it's time.
I remember before it was a podcast, when it was just audio on a website, and having to go into my web stats to figure out how many times an MP3 was played. That was a nightmare. So just stats alone, trying to see, you know, where people are coming from and things like that. The fact that I don't have to dig through a log file anymore, that was a huge time suck.
I can pay for stats without getting hosting, though. So that's one nice thing. Blueberry, right? You guys offer stats without hosting. So that may be your first sort of, I pay for this thing, right? I want better stats. I pay for stats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't even get Blueberry stats for free.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a free version, which you will graduate from when you realize you want more stats, right? So, you know, I can insert my tagline, grow as you go. Like, these are all the same concepts. You know, I think for me, always the key is to get people started. And ideally, we get them started in the right direction. And hopefully, you know, I think most of us here would start you on hosting, and that's based on experience of doing it for a long time. It sounds like many of us, we didn't start that way. So it's not atypical that you start and you don't choose hosting.
Yeah, but I think most of us started in a different time.
Sure, but regardless.
Yeah, but it was a different time.
Even when hosting was an option, I went free. Let's not kid ourselves until free was a problem.
Yeah, see, I always tell people the problem is, you, as we said at the beginning, you might not have a problem, but when you do, now you have a problem because you have an audience. So you're having a problem in front of a whole bunch of people because you wanted to save $5 a month.
That's a good one. Oh, we lost the battery on Todd. So if you're watching the video version, he just literally dropped. Like, this is like a game show where if you don't interrupt in enough time, you battery just drop off.
You got gone.
No, I actually have a trigger, Glenn, and I will.
Okay, good.
I'll eject you.
So
what you don't want to be is the monks who would hoist people up on this little rope elevator up to this level on this to view this monastery on this big cliff. And so it's this long ride up with this a little elevator that's supported just by this one single rope. And this family is going up with this monk as he's pulling them up. And the family looks up at the rope and notices it's kind of getting frayed. And they ask the monk, when do you replace that? And the monk says, when it breaks.
Well, you know, too, I didn't start out planning to have a network. I started out having fun talking to my one co-host with one show.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden got sponsors, and we got 16 shows, and I'm here 10 years down the line. I didn't plan. It was supposed to be a fun little project. So I think that's how, you know, maybe some of you could address that, but I think sometimes it surprises us.
No, that's why this one is called the rising cost of play. Like, everyone here started for fun. I mean, you talked about we all started at a different time. Yeah, we started at a time when it was passion that lit all these podcasts on fire, literally just blew us right up on fire. And so we didn't plan for these things, but we've all had to grow into some different, evolution of our show. Rob?
Yeah, also, I think, just to kind of throw in here a little bit too, I think when there's a lot of new people starting in podcasting right now that don't really know very much about how to podcast. And I think going with a hosting platform that's got a long history of building the tools and the functionality that's needed to do it the right way, that's compliant with Apple and compliant with the various distribution platforms, and has been optimized based on experience and based on usage, is a big value. I mean, $5 a month. I know Spreaker has $5 a month plan, and people can get started very easily and get a show up. But still, there's this huge learning curve that they still have. Even making a platform easy to use, low cost. I think that, and I'm starting to see this more and more too, and the people that I talk to, is that I think we're starting to dip into content creators that are coming from the same kind of thought processes as what went to YouTube very early. And I think they're starting to expect things to be almost free, more and more. And I think what we are talking about this show is kind of like two ends of the spectrum, right? There's There's the very kind of beginner people don't know how to podcast, just get started. They object to even paying $5 a month, actually. And then you get the other end of the spectrum where guys are paying $10,000 a month or more for their bandwidth. And so somehow the hosting platforms have to cater to that extreme. And, you know, if I refer to Spreaker plays at the beginner end. We try and offer a lot of easy to use tools, and it's low cost. People can create multiple shows on the platform for $5 a month. So we're not quite as limited. So I think we're a platform that really makes it easy for people to get started, but we're not great at catering to those big guys, which other platforms are catering to. So I think we have the spectrum, and people just start coming at it more and more. I mean, I feel very strongly that we're in a content era right now. Content is just exploding online in this medium. You know, you talk to Todd or Dave, I mean, you probably are seeing the numbers too. There's just so many new people coming in creating podcasts right now. It's crazy. It is kind of a little bit of an explosion. I wouldn't say it's a hockey stick growth, but it's certainly probably twice as much as it was 3 years ago. Yeah.
Let's not
don't be fooled. Be fooled. YouTube is not giving you anything for free. You're giving them content. They're getting ads.
Right. Yeah, but it's a perception, right? It's a perception. They give you all the tools. They give you everything that you need. Right.
And podcast hosts aren't. You know, I mean, here's the thing. If you go, there are other podcast hosts, and I guess I won't mention them. But you are going to go there, and you're going to exchange. They're going to put ads in your stuff. I mean, just today, Dave, you're telling me Anchor's inserting ads. If you go to even a platform, you think, oh, I'm getting distribution on Spreaker, and I mean, not Spreaker, sorry, on Stitcher, and they're giving me a bigger audience. Yeah, you're trading it for ads. They're stitching in ads that you don't have control over.
We did a survey with our Patreons the other day, and it was interesting. We asked, why do you bail on a podcast? Similar to what you were asking, Dave. And the overwhelming was the sound quality sucked. That was number one on the list. The sound, no matter how good the content was, if the sound quality sucked, they weren't staying. And the second thing is if irrelevant ads interrupted the podcast.
Sure.
That we do a lot of ads, but they're all relevant, and there's things that our people buy. But when those irrelevant ads just pop in at weird times in the middle of a sentence, they bailed.
That's a whole nother roundtable that Rob would love to be on. We could talk about dynamic ad insertion and the perception of that and the type of ads.
Did you know that 15 minutes will save you 15%?
Hey, and working. It's working on Dave. Working on Dave. Hey, Alexa, ask me. Oh, never mind.
So is that a new advertising campaign for Libsyn, Dave?
Yeah.
Glenn, was there
if you only do a 15-minute podcast, it's going to be 15% off?
Yeah, no, that's the Geico ad, don't you?
My dad always said, because I had three brothers, we were all entrepreneurs. He always said, success is going to come with problems, but those problems sure be not having success.
Yeah.
So deal with those problems as they come along. Be happy you're successful, and just work it through. So you know what? If your show grows like crazy and you're becoming successful, figure it out. It sure beats the people who are out there that are feeling that they're not successful, but are still doing it week after week. So the alternative still, I think the alternative still is not as good.
Hey, and if your numbers are low, you have something to be. There's a silver lining in there. Your costs are low too.
That's right.
Well, anyways, go ahead.
I've got a question for you guys. Do you think it's possible to have a better podcast because it has advertising in it?
Ooh, better is a tough word in that sense.
I know it is.
I have an answer for that. I used to listen to a show. I didn't like the show. It was on webmaster.fm. I forget the name of the show. But the only reason I listened is their ads always brought up some service that I'd never heard of. And most of the time it was something I wanted to dig in later. It was some sort of web building tool or whatever. The hosts were all like, hey, dude, it's morning radio guy. And it was like, and they had too many ads actually, but I listened for the ads. But that's that only happened once.
Yeah, if you're the Super Bowl where people tune into the ads, or it's a very, very rare exceptions. I love a YouTube show, and I think they probably distribute via podcast. Film Riot is fantastic, right? And these guys have ads for website hosts and stuff. When they make basically they teach filmmaking. And when they do a short little film wrapped in the ad, they are some of the best. It's better than sometimes their content. And I will watch and rewind. So you have to be extra talented to make that work. So I would say it's possible, but for the majority.
Except in our case, I'm lucky that way because horse people are addicted to horses. They spend all their money on horses. They're always looking for new stuff. So we do product reviews on a lot of our shows, and we do a lot of commercials.
What's content then?
It becomes content, and they care about it because they're always looking for the next best saddle. They're always looking for the next best bridle. They're wanting to spend their money on horse stuff. So we're in a little bit of a different niche that way than a general show because our people really do want to spend their money on horse stuff.
Yeah. Hey, Glenn, I'm watching on video. I want to know what microphone you're using.
This is the $15 Behringer.
See, our podcast just got better. We could spend 15 minutes talking about it, but we're not going to.
The expensive mic over there, and I hate the thing. So I've always come back to this one.
See, we're practically doing an ad here, Rob.
Yeah.
But anyways, Rob, what were you getting at?
Oh, I was just taking a little bit of a contrarian view because I've heard many people say that adding advertising to your podcast is not going to make it a better show.
Mostly
and
no.
so,
I would say mostly.
Yeah, but I think there are examples where that's contrary.
Yeah, and I think the examples are in the niches. I think the examples are in the niches like mine. If you have a hiking podcast, if you have a golfing podcast, if you have a podcast where people spend a lot of money on what they're doing, then they care about products. And I think that's a big difference.
If you do a good job bringing it to them, not just it's Chrysler made an ad and they asked you to read the copy, or actually they record it themselves.
And we only advertise stuff we actually use as hosts.
Of course.
Yeah. And you've got to make it entertaining. I mean, I used to love listening to Howard Stern read ads because he'd be almost making fun of the product. I have yet to hear, I don't listen to his show, but I hear a lot about Bill Burr, who's another comedian, that his ads are fantastic because he just he's not reading the points. He's just making up stuff and it's hilarious. And half the reason you remember it is I can't believe he just said that in a commercial.
Sure, I give credibility to advertisers who have content producers who they let say anything because I'm like, these guys they're making a joke at this ad practically, but obviously the creator is okay with it, and it all, so I give credit to those people who are forward looking enough to know it's okay to let them free with the ad.
We can blame Paul Harvey for all of this. I mean, when Paul Harvey said buy Gold Bond, every old person in the country bought Gold Bond. He's the one that started host read ads.
Hey, Dave, I've got a question for you. So did you sell those positions with those pictures behind your head as ads?
He asked the Glenn the same thing. He's the one that makes all the money. Yeah. I think he took a page. Actually, the question is who was first? I think it was. I don't
know. We're at the same time, actually. I think.
Yeah, really.
Glenn paid me $10 for this picture of him right here in the car.
Right there in
if you're just listening to the audio version, because almost all of you are, Dave and Glenn have pictures of their audience behind them. It's a good reason to tune in. It's to see everyone's little studio.
That group right there is paid because there are Patreons. That's how you get on the wall.
Hey, there you go.
See, that's why Glenn makes the big bucks. Mine are free. So
I would have paid to be there.
I did learn don't turn on the fan when you have a bunch of pictures, or make sure they're really taped to the wall well. So if you're wondering why there's a couple spots, I turned on the fan and
blew them off.
People went flying. Yeah.
Despite webcam video, I can still see people. I see Miss Eileen
blow off
back
your
there,
fans,
so
right, Dave? Is that what you're doing here?
That's it. I'm just blowing off my fans.
Rob, your air conditioner's broken.
Okay, that's the line of the night right there.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to turn your air conditioner off when you podcast anyways for that better sound quality. So, Rob, you're in a perfect position there. No AC. Rob's AC is broken, so thanks for joining us. Anyways, we're going to wrap up here. If you have anything to add that we missed, go ahead and interject that. But otherwise, let us know where we can find your podcast, one of your podcasts. Now, here's the thing, Dave, you're right. I start two, right? So I have to actually give this disclaimer now. You can't give one. You got to follow the rules. Actually, the Roundtable is all about breaking the rules, so do what you want. And Daniel J. Lewis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm from theaudacitytopodcast.com. And to throw in an extra answer to Rob's question about sponsors adding to the podcast, I remembered that a couple years ago, one of the episodes of my podcast was sponsored. It was the last time I've done an ad spot on the Audacity to Podcast, episode 225 was how to prepare yourself for video podcasting or live streaming. And the sponsor was Harry's Razors.
Yep. I remember
and that made my show better because I knew when I was going to do that sponsorship spot that I wanted to build content around it to make it relevant. And so I got 2 full episodes of content, at least 2 episodes, but I did first how to prepare yourself for audio, and then the other was how to prepare yourself for video. So I used the sponsor to inspire content, and that worked out great. And I'm a Harry's customer still today, a paying customer, by the way. But you can check out all of the non-sponsored podcast episodes of the Audacity to Podcast and all of my other content at theaudacitytopodcast.com, and follow me on social places at the Daniel J. Lewis.
And that is the key. The key is that relationship, because you're now putting it's a third wheel. You've got a relationship with your audience, and now you're going to advertise or a sponsor. They're a third wheel on that date. So you better find a way to make them, to make everyone happy. So anyways, weird analogy, but Dave Jackson, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com. And we kind of mentioned this earlier. I know Steve said it in the chat room. As much as we all hate to pay for stuff, it's still probably cheaper than golf, or insert your favorite hobby, or bowling, or horses. Yes. So
Yeah, if you Starbucks lattes, if you buy too many Starbucks lattes, you could have paid for your podcast hosting.
You sacrilege. Rob's in Seattle, so he's probably going to get evicted from his house.
That's right. I live actually 5 minutes away from the corporate headquarters.
Actually, I have a bumper sticker on my car that says it's cheaper than horses. So yeah, I agree.
There you go.
Speaking of horses, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and don't let the fear of cost stop you from succeeding. All right, let's deal with that when you get to it. Yeah, horseradionetwork.com. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. And if worse comes to worse, you shut it down, but you did it.
You did it, or you find a way to pay for it.
There's always a way. There's always a way. All right. Hey, Rob, thanks for joining us once again from your non-air conditioned home. Yes. Open up the windows, man. It's Seattle.
I know, exactly. Let the breeze blow in, right? Yeah, well, thanks for having me on your show again. It was great. I can be found online. The main show I do is my Spreaker Live show. So SpreakerLiveShow.com. So only one.
I'm going to plug the other one for you, so don't worry about it.
Do a show with Todd Cochrane too every Sunday.
There you go. See, Todd had his spot. You can fill in his plug for him. So Rob gets 2 by proxy. The New Media Show is one of my favorites, so I would definitely give that a shout out. So yes, thanks Todd Cochrane. He was ejected, but he'll be back. So we'll see all of you. We're approaching 98. We're getting there. We're about to graduate. I'm going to order my cap and gown. It's getting exciting. So excited. So join us for Round 98 next time. Podcastersroundtable.com/guest if you want to sign up and be on a roundtable and get you on here at some point. So thanks, Wave. We are out. See you guys.